All right, great. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Rich Toebe. I'm the livestock educator with Cornell Cooperative Extension of Delaware County. I've been here in New York for about 5 years. Prior to that, I was in Wisconsin, and I've been a poultry producer for probably close to 25 years. In the image behind me, as you look at my talking pace there, that was one of my pasture buildings that I had back in Wisconsin when I had a meat CSA. We would raise somewhere between 350 and 500 birds a year for our customers. And I've also had eggs. I currently just have ducks that I use in my pasture. So I have some level of experience with poultry, but I don't consider myself a super expert. So there may be some questions I'm not going to be able to answer, but I will get back to you. So if there's a question that you have that I can't answer, if I know what your email is, I will reach out to you and find that answer for you. So why poultry? You should have, it's important to know why you want to raise poultry. Is it to get meat or eggs for yourself? Is it dual purpose? You want both from the same bird? You have a hobby? You're looking for a small business where you're going to try to generate some income from poultry? Is it a response to the COVID-19 crisis, food security? That's what kind of prompted me to put together this presentation, because I know a lot of people were saying, hey, I want to raise some eggs for myself. And I think it's one of the easiest gateways to livestock production that there is chickens for eggs. Is it a family project looking to teach responsibility? Chickens are a great way to do that. They're very easy to handle, and it's not all that expensive of a business to get into. And maybe you just have a passion for poultry, but it's important to know why. So this picture here in the upper right, that's me when I'm a little bit grumpy. And so this is kind of my grumpy slide. Raising poultry may not be for everyone. So you should make sure you want to do this if you're a beginner. And so I have a few things here I want to go through to make sure that you kind of quiz yourself and think that this is a good idea to do. Some breeds of poultry can live a long time, 10 years or even 15 years. So if they become pets, you might have them, it might be a 10-year commitment if you're unwilling to part with them at some point. And it's good to recognize that. Some breeds are selected to live very short lives, and they need to live very short lives. The Cornish rock cross, which is what most of the chicken we eat is, needs to be harvested at 5 to 7 weeks. And they will not have a humane life if you try to raise them for multiple years because they grow so fast. They have some issues with musculature and bone structure. Egg layers become less productive after just 2 or 3 years. 5 or 6 years in, you may be only getting 20 or 30% of the eggs that you got in the first year. So is that going to be okay? Are you going to be okay continuing to feed them? Or are you going to slaughter them? Egg layers, those hens, they make great stewing hens. It can be really expensive to do this, and it might be actually cheaper for you to just buy eggs from someone else in the neighborhood or meat from a poultry producer. So just recognize that it's not, commodity poultry and eggs that you buy in your supermarket are going to be less expensive than this. You'll need to care for your birds even in winter. And here in the Northeast, we typically have a lot of frozen days where water freezes, and we have to have a plan for that. There likely will be poultry chores every single day. And so it may affect some of your lifestyle, the rest of your lifestyle. And you may have to give thought who's going to take care of the chickens when you want to go away on vacation. Cleaning a poultry house is not necessarily pleasant. And there may be many things that want to and probably will at some point eat your birds or your eggs. So you need to be prepared that predation may interrupt the joy that you're getting from a chicken enterprise. So I'll take my grumpy face back off, and hopefully most of you are still with us. And so if you still want to raise poultry, there's a lot of wonderful things about raising poultry. It's a very rewarding activity. Poultry are endlessly fascinating. I've had poultry 25 years, and I still thoroughly enjoy watching the antics of the birds. They can really help with pests, slugs, ticks, snails. They can really do some valuable work for you. Poultry manure, they're going to generate a fair amount of manure, and that's great for gardening. You may want to compost that first. Eggs and meat quality will be superior, so you will be rewarded with really good eggs and really tasty chicken meat. And poultry can become great companions. I had a friend that had a pet chicken, and he would step outside and sit on his chair, and the chicken would run over and jump on his lap and be petted. And so they can become great companions. And then the last thing in many areas, especially more urban areas, your town or city may have codes that regulate the amount of poultry. In fact, we had one person online that mentioned that that was their issue, that they're going through that process. So check your town codes and make sure that it's okay for you to have poultry if you're in a urban type setting. So tonight's talk, I want to go through the basic needs. This is really more for beginners than people that are looking at this as a business. So I'm going to be talking about brooding, housing, waters and feeders, feed and water, predator protection, some of the caretaker chores, so that you have an idea of what all that is involved in that. And then I'll go through a couple of additional things to know about how to go about acquiring birds, a little bit about breeds. I'm going to just touch on marketing, and then I'll talk a little bit about health. So that's what I'm hoping to accomplish tonight. So I'm going to start with the day-old chicks. So this is probably how you're going to get started. Is you're going to either through the mail or going to a feed supply store, you're going to pick up some chicks. And what's important to know is that you need to have your brooder ready before you order your chicks or you go pick them up. In fact, New York has a law saying that in order to sell chicks to someone, you actually have to have knowledge that the brooder is already in place, so that those baby chicks will be taken care of right away. You need to have adequate space in that brooder, about a half square foot per chick. It's best if there's no corners, although many brooders do. This picture down in the lower right was taken at the local Tractor Supply, and you can see there's no corners in that. And this is actually a common way that people set up a brooder. You need to have a very reliable heat source, and these chicks need it quite warm. On week 1, for the first week, they need the air temperature 95 degrees, and then each after, you want to reduce that by 5 degrees. And you need to give some, you may need to have some sort of, be prepared to upon arrival, you're going to want to dip beaks of those birds in water so that they get a very quick drink and they know where the water is. You're going to want to keep the light so that the birds can familiarize themselves. And then after that, if it's enough, you can turn the light off. 8 hours of light needs beyond that. Once feathered, you can transfer them to other housing. And the New York law is you cannot purchase, sell, or give away turkeys or any other that are less of age. They need to be in groups of 6 or more. And then in the upper, if it's too cold, all of the chicks will be hovered underneath the light. If not, they'll be trying to get away from for you to check on the comfort level of the chicks. Okay, so we have a few slides here of photos. These are my chicks on the right that I had in brooders. You can see I have a thermometer in there. I think that's a really good idea. And you can see that blue there. So I have a pan underneath this to collect keep it dry. And then there's a clip of duckling there about to have and placed in. Here's some more examples of some brooders that I've had, glass pane and a screen, and I can open and close that to help adjust the temperature in there inside the brooder. In the lower left, you can see a picture of someone dipping the beak of a chick in the water as arrival of case we're using newspaper for the day or two, and we replace that frequently before. I think these are probably somewhere between $70 and $100 lamps. You can easily start a fire with these lamps. You need to make sure secure and give careful thought to that. And it might be worth not using a lamp and getting a different underneath or these brooders here to eliminate the fire risk. And going out into your regular house. So these here are pictures of chicks that I had a few days after moving them from the brooder out to the house. You can see that they have some level of feathering. They're not fully feathered yet, but once they have feathers there and the weather's appropriate, you can move on to graduate to the next house. And in some cases, you may continue to supplement with a little heat, as you can see in the lower left photo. A few slides specifically about poultry and several things that you want to make sure that there's adequate space. I have a slide that helps you know how much space you have. You need to give thought to ventilation. They need clean, fresh air, and you want a certain amount of air exchange. You may need to insulate your building for winter. And you want your building easy to clean. The Friends coop that they have, a lovely coop, well insulated. The air quality in it is great. There's a ramp there, but I cleaned it up and fun because I stooped over to get in there. I'll be talking about nest boxes, roosts. You need to make sure your building will withstand snow if it's going to be outside. And in snow. You need to think about how you're getting water to the building, both in summer and winter. A garbage can that we kept our feet in and that we just moved. For hens, and I already talked about movement to do your chores. So here's some space, and this is for chicken. There column is birds, heavy, light, and bantam. So some of the brown layers are pretty heavy birds. They might, adults might be 7, 8, 9 pounds. So they need a little bit more space. Light birds, sorry about this. I talked about that there are 4 columns. One is bird, there are birds heavy, those are even lighter than that. And then there's the age column, so they need more space as they grow. And then there's a square foot per in housing, meaning that there's a building that they are in, and then they have an outside area that run to, and then if they're in complete confinement, I'm going to have several pictures of different types of housing options. There's your standard coop, which is kind of a hard structure that has and a roof and a floor. There's free range, which is typically are letting sometimes within an area that's needed, electric, sometimes just out in and around their house. There's a lot of portable movable shelters. A lot of these are done. Some are called day range, where there's a fencing, arcs, where the entire building is moved. Yeah, so I went through this. I said that I have pictures of several of these, including commercial scale housing. So these here in the upper left is one of my buildings that I had. You can see that they're right here. That's actually this building here, which was an insulated building. And this worked for 5 layer hens. This is my current building in the lower left, which I use for ducks. 8 by 12 in size, and You can see that I have netting on the top. It's kind of a box, and I'll talk a little bit about more of that. Is I'm not sure. I pulled that off the internet. It's probably a commercially available type house. Okay, some people get quite innovative, and someone used a school mobile and out the back door. You often see people on farms or rural settings that have an old building that they might. You can see an old building that was maybe.
Okay. On the hoop house, um, is is this just sheet plastic, which we're assuming, and do you have to worry about the chickens pecking at the plastic or not?
Yeah, both good questions. So yes, this is a hoop house, and they're using a plastic that's designed for the hoop house, and it doesn't look like there's anything there protecting that I can see. I'm not actually familiar with this hoop house. But you may need to put some sort of chicken wire or something in any area where the chickens could peck, because that could become a problem, especially if they learn that they get some sort of entertainment or activity from it. I think you might be safe until it's no longer safe. So I would put something up to start with to prevent it from ever starting. All right. Unless there's any other questions on this slide, we can move to the next slide.
There was one question, Rich. Do you need to start with chicks, or can you start with laying hens?
You can start with laying hens. You can start with pullets. I believe I have a slide on that later on. The thing about buying adult birds is you need to make sure that you're not buying birds that have disease issues. So it may be more challenging. There are several hatcheries or nurseries that sell what's called a pullet. So that's a bird that's maybe 20 weeks of age and is about to start laying. And those, you have a high degree of confidence that they're going to be coming to your farm disease-free. If you go to Craigslist to buy an adult chicken, which is an easy thing to do, there's probably even free chickens that you can find. You might very well be bringing in a disease which you wouldn't want to do. So you may then want to find a breeder with a good reputation if you're wanting to start with adult birds. There's a lot of, so if there's not any other questions, I'll talk about the slide in front of us here. These were all pictures of buildings that could be purchased at tractorsupply.com. And so if you want to just go and buy something to get started for your poultry house, that's an easy thing to do. And I did look at the prices of these, and they range somewhere between $250 and probably slightly over $1,000 for these structures that you see. Looking at these pictures here, these are two buildings that I had back in Wisconsin. The one in the upper part of the photo, both of the upper photos are of my portable eggmobile. And so this is a trailer that I built a structure on. And the ramp of the trailer is what the chickens go up in. There's roofs over the side, and you can see the area where there isn't a trailer underneath. There was just some hardware cloth there that allowed manure to pass through. And then there's egg boxes on the end, and this was sized for about 35 birds. The lower one was a building that's 10 feet by 18 feet, and it was designed for about 350 broiler hens. And so in both those pictures, those are broilers. I would raise about 300 to 400 broilers at a time. So in the upper, you already saw the photo in the upper left. This is a nice small eggmobile that was good for about 6 to 8 birds. And this is a friend of ours, and you can see they had a special ramp in the upper right of the photo. And they also raised broilers, and they raised them in fairly small pens. These are kind of what we call the Salatin-style pens in a day range type system, where they would move those forward every day, and each type of bird there would have a small run for that day. And here are, in the upper left, those are my current ducks, and you can see my electronet there, and we often have those ducks in with our sheep to eat snails and slugs to help control a parasite that involves snails and slugs in its life cycle. In the upper right is one of the very first broiler pens that I built. It's just cattle panels that are stretched with a tarp on it. And inside there's a small roost for the broilers, which isn't always necessary. The two bottom photos are what's often referred to as the Salatin pens after Joel Salatin. And these are moved once or twice a day, and they make a dramatic impact on the grass, as you can see in the lower right. And they can really change the fertility because you have a lot of birds in a really small space. 20 years of a poultry art. This comes from a University of Wisconsin Extension bulletin. So these are popular for really small flocks of 5 or 6 birds in people's backyards, and you can just move it around. So there's one half of the building they can go in and roost and lay their eggs, and the other half they can come out and graze, and then each day you move that forward. And we'll move on to slide 21, which is a commercial scale. It's unlikely that any of you will get to this level, but in the lower right, you might get to the level that I did, which is running about 300 to 400 birds at a time. But I just wanted to show you what some of the more modern poultry commercial facilities look like that have outdoor access. It is about water. We want to provide clean water at all times, and we want to regularly scrub out those water containers with a brush to make sure that we don't have any bacterial films beginning to grow on the inside of them. Chickens prefer water that is between 50 and 55 degrees. With warmer water, they'll actually drink less and they'll start to lay fewer eggs. Birds will consume 1 to 2 cups of water a day, and it's largely dependent on the temperature and how much wind they're being exposed to if they're outside. And actively laying birds will drink about twice as much as a bird that is not drinking. And it's because they're making all those eggs. And there's a lot of moisture needed for that. You want to place your waterer at the height of the bird's back, and this will help prevent the birds from putting their feet in the water and messing it up. And you want to find a way to provide that water so that it doesn't make the surrounding areas wet, especially when you're inside a building and there's bedding, because wet bedding breeds disease, and it also has a lot of work to take out wet bedding and replace it with dry. So find a way to keep the area around the waterer dry inside a building. Is pictures of various waters. So on the left are some of the commercial varieties that you would buy from a feed supply store. In the upper right, you can see there are 3 little white and red circles with blue hoses attached to them. So these are actually attached to a charged line with a pressure reducer. And every time I move the building, I also move the water. There's actually 6 different waterers hooked up to that. Drip nipples are often a common way of providing water. And the bottom side just says you need to think about how you're providing water in winter. It may be coming out multiple days with a bucket of fresh water, or you may have to provide a heated water, which is also readily available at feed supply stores. Next slide is about feed, and I would advise people to just go to a supply store and buy the appropriate bag feed for the type of bird that you have. And in the written information there's information on the protein that you want. So broiler chicks in the first 3 weeks need the most protein. You're going to be looking for 20 to 24%. And layer chicks, you only need about 18 to 20% for the pullet starter. For the youngest chicks, you may want to consider getting a feed that contains a coccidiostat. Coccidia is one of the most prevalent diseases, and it affects very young animals. And so you may want to do that or you may not. It might depend on your market or your personal value system. It's best to buy pre-formulated bags, adjust gradually between feed types. So as they get older, you're going to give them less protein. So if you're giving them a 24% protein and you're going to switch to an 18%, mix the feeds together for a few days so they gradually start eating the lower protein. Read the bag for the rate recommendations. Keep the feed fresh. Try to only have about a month's supply on hand at any time. Again, raise the feeder to the height of the chicken's back to help minimize the amount of scratching they do in it and waste. If allowed outdoor access, chickens will eat a lot of insects, grasses, worms, and they may reduce the amount of commercial feed that you need to purchase for them. You may want to provide scratch grains, especially if you like interacting with your chickens. But if you're buying a commercially developed bagged feed, you don't really need to do that. And then the bottom photo, I in wintertime would often sprout different types of seeds in my bathtub in the house and then bring them out and feed them so that the birds could have some fresh green feed and help keep those yolks more orange rather than pale yellow. Is the pictures of different feeders. In the center are the commercial type feeders. And generally, if you're starting with chicks, you have one type of feeder, which would be the center red feeder. And as they grow older, you typically apply feed in a hanging type feeder. And a lot of people make their own. In the upper right, you can see some tube feeders that people have developed. In the lower right is one of the feeders that we had for when we had a fewer number of chickens. And in the left, you can see, again, some of the feeders in use. Laying hens need adequate light year-round, and hens will molt and quit laying in decreased hours of light. So if you don't provide any light and you just rely on natural light, your chickens will start to lay at about this time of the year, and then sometime in September, October, they'll probably go into a molt and quit laying. So a lot of people shortchange that by applying light, and so the maximum production for layers is with about 14 to 16 hours of daylight. And you can do that quite easily by purchasing a timer. The timer in the lower left there costs about $6, and you only need about 15 to 25 watts of light to achieve the what you need to so that the chickens continue to lay eggs. The next slide is on molting. It's a natural process. The picture there is of a hen that is in molt. Short day length signal birds to renew plumage, and you should allow your birds to go through a molt at least once a year. Most hens, especially older ones, will stop laying for about 2 months while they go through this molt. And typically you want this to happen in the fall of the year so that in winter they have a fresh plumage that'll help keep them warm. Molting can also be caused by stress. So if you forget to feed or water your animals for a couple of days, or if there's a sudden chilling, it might cause them to go into a molt. Next slide is on roosts. It's most important for laying hens and turkeys. Pasture broilers don't really need them. For mature chickens, you need about 8 to 9 inches of roost space for a bird so they can all comfortably roost, and you can see that in the lower right. You want to space your roosts about 12 to 14 inches apart, and I would suggest using 2x2s or 2x4s and not 1-inch dowels. A lot of people think, something really small and narrow is good. Actually, a 2x4 is much more comfortable for them to sit on the 3.5 or the 4-inch side of the 2x4 instead of the 2-inch side of the 2x4. The next slide is on nest boxes. The chickens want to lay their eggs, or all poultry want to lay their eggs in a dark, out-of-the-way space, so that's why we have these chicken boxes. And for birds, you want them to be 14 by 12 by 12 for smaller birds. If you have larger birds, you might want 14 by 14 by 12. You want to have a front panel on them, about 4 inches of height to keep the eggs from rolling out. You generally start by placing your nest boxes on the floor, and once your pullets or your young chickens get used to using them, then you want to raise them up 18 to 20 inches off the ground for chickens. For ducks, you would leave them on the floor. You may want to consider using ceramic eggs to help your chickens begin to gain comfort and know that that's where they're supposed to lay their eggs. If you put a perch on the front side of the box, it'll help keep it clean. And you may want to consider outside access, as you can see in the photo there. If outside access makes it so much easier to go and collect the eggs without disturbing the birds inside. You want to furnish about one box for each 4 birds, and you want to collect your eggs twice daily. Move on to the next slide, which is predation. So this is one of the most discouraging things that happen to poultry producers, is that things are going along really nicely and suddenly they go out there and they find missing animals, missing chickens, or they find a partially eaten chicken, and there's all sorts of things that wanna eat. From rats will go in and eat young chicks, or eggs. Owls are fantastic nighttime predators, and they just need a space big enough to walk into to get a chicken. So just leaving that chicken-sized door open won't necessarily keep the owls away. And so you may need to think about building a Fort Knox for them at night. You want to bury the fence to prevent animals that want to dig. You may want to put netting over the top, and you saw that with my duck building at the start of the presentation. Electric fencing is quite effective against things like coyotes or raccoons. You may want guard dogs or donkeys. A lot of people that raise significant numbers of poultry out on their pastures will get a dog that has a temperament that makes it want to look for aerial predators, and they'll keep the aerial predators away, which is one of the biggest problems for pasture poultry production. And in the worst case scenario, you may need to resort to some sort of lethal method. Just make sure that it's legal. Shooting eagles is not. Owls, it's not legal. But in some states, you'll have to check again with your local laws. It may be acceptable to deal with a coyote, for example, that has evidence of predating. Next slide is caretaker responsibilities, and a lot of times, especially with layer hens, it's a twice a day chore, because you're going to let them out into an outside run or an outside area in the morning, or you're going to move the pen in the morning or your nets in the morning. You're going to give them feed and water. You're going to collect eggs, observe for health issues, and in the evening you're going to lock them up again and collect any additional eggs that may have been laid during the day. Weekly, you're going to have to think about scrubbing those waterers or those feeders, adding or aerating the bedding inside the coop. And then monthly, seasonally, or between batches of birds, you're going to be having to think about butchering or arranging butchering in the case of broilers, or you may have to do a thorough house cleaning a couple of times a year for your layer hens, where you're going to remove and replace all bedding and possibly even disinfect some of the surfaces. And lastly, you need to think about who's going to do this when you're away. And so think about that before vacation day arrives. And the next slide is just a close-up of a chicken, and it's a transition slide for me, so I wanted to pause to see if there's any questions.
What would you recommend to disinfect between batches?
That's a good question, and I don't have an immediate answer. This is Sonia, I believe, and I will look that up and I'll email you. And all of you that have emailed to participate, I'll send you a follow-up email as well with a recommendation related to that. Any additional questions?
Question about coop and temperature. We put our chickens out probably at the end of March and put the heat lamp out with them because they were about 5 weeks old, but they had feathers. And we've been turning the heat lamp off during the day and they've been out in their run, but at night when they go back in, they're all laying on top of each other as if they're freezing. So we're kind of turning the heat lamp back on, but not really sure when it's appropriate to transition to no heat lamp.
Well, I would take a look at the amount of feathering that they have. So if you still see some of that down or the initial feathers that they have when they arrive, and you see a lot of feathers that are still not come out of their sheaths, it's probably still good to have the heat lamp on. And I would look at reducing that temperature. If you go back to the recommendation on week 1, 95 degrees, week 2 is 90, week 3 would be 85, week 4, 80, week 5, 75 degrees. So I might think about trying to aim for a temperature of 75 degrees on week 5 and week 6 to 70 degrees. But once they're fully feathered, and most of those feathers had opened, that shouldn't be an issue anymore, and turn it off. But there's nothing wrong with having that light there. You certainly don't want them climbing on each other to try to stay warm. So if you're seeing that behavior, that was a good decision to say, okay, let's put some heat back in there. They weren't quite ready.
Should I leave out grit, and should I feed diatomaceous earth?
Those, both those things I think are okay to put out there. You can look at your feed bag and see if they've put those sorts of things in there. Most of the chicken layer feed should have something in there for grit, so that they can, that their gizzards can work. Or animals or the birds that are allowed to go outside, they'll probably find all the grit they need, and you wouldn't need to supply that. But there's no harm in doing that, in my opinion.
Rich, there's a question in the chat. Any specifics for urban folks? For example, Kathleen has an 8x8 area for her coop. She can plant grass if recommended, and will be able to allow them into an 8x11 area where they have a raised bed and some container gardening.
Yeah, I think it's fine to do that. That's a relatively small area, and I'm guessing it's probably just a few birds. They might begin to denude that. Chickens do a lot of scratching, and they do a lot of digging. And so if there's a raised bed area where you're growing vegetables or something else or other ornamental plants, they might do a fair amount of damage to those plants. So it's something that I think I would just go ahead and try. It's nice that they have a run area, and if there's some way that they can modify where that run area is each day, or if you're out there with your chickens for an hour, you may just want to let them out. I don't know exactly, how confining this person's yard area is, but if you have 5,000 square feet of backyard, you may want to let your chickens out for a half an hour while you're out there with them, and let them run around that way as well. All right, why don't we continue on here to slide 33, acquiring your birds. And I've already addressed the first line there, buying chicks, pullets, or adults. So, the advantage of buying a mature animal is you're going to get eggs right away. If you're buying day-old chicks, you're probably going to be waiting 20 to 24 weeks before you get any eggs. But it's an enjoyable process to watch chicks turn into adult chickens. One of the most common ways to getting your birds is to go online or a catalog, and it comes in the mail. If you're doing this, I would let the post office know ahead, so that as soon as they arrive, they'll give you a call and you can run down there and pick them up, and you don't have to wait the additional 6 or 8 hours or however long it takes for them to get to your house on their daily run, and they often appreciate that heads up. There are lots of good breeders out there, so if you are interested in a particular breed, and you may go online and look for breeders and go that way. Feed supply stores often sell day-old chicks. I know the one in my town does. In New York, you have to purchase them in groups of at least 6, and you need to have your brooder ready if you're buying day-old chicks or chickens less than 2 months of age. If you're buying chicks, I would definitely consider it worth the extra 5 cents or 10 cents to get them vaccinated against Marek's, Newcastle, and infectious bronchitis if that's possible. Have your brooder and final housing ready and avoid free birds going to swap meets. You can easily get chickens that have diseases. The last time I did that, I ended up getting rid of my birds, a few months after I got them because they had some issues, and I really regretted that. So I actually have personal experience in getting free birds off the internet. Not a good idea. So if what you're really interested in is a high number of eggs and you really want eggs to be a business, you're probably going to look at breeds like White Leghorn, Rhode Island Red, or some of the commercial breeds. In the bottom row of photos there, that's a White Leghorn in the left, and the next one is a Star, which is a commercial egg layer. Brown egg layers tend to be heavier, larger birds that do better in cold climates and lay more consistently in winter. So these would be what I would probably recommend for the small backyard flocks here in New York. Rocks, Orpingtons, Delaware, New Hampshire Red, Wyandottes are all good choices there. White egg layers tend to be lighter birds, such as Ancanas, Leghorns, and Hamburgs. If you want white eggs, get that. Most of the feed supply stores will tell you what color egg you're going to get from the birds that they have for sale, and the catalogs always do. Feather-footed birds are not the best layers, but they make really good setters and mothers. So if you're wanting to raise some of your own chicks down the road, you may want to get some of these feather-footed breeds such as Brahma or Cochin, and they will get quite broody and want to sit on eggs rather than keep laying eggs. The next slide talks about meat breeds. So the classic, most common meat breed in almost all commercial poultry in the United States is the Cornish Rock, and these birds in the commercial setting sometimes are actually butchered at 4 weeks of age. In the homestead type situation or pasture situations, that may be extended to 5 to 7 weeks. They're very efficient. They're double-breasted. If you look at that photo in the upper right, you can see that the Cornish Rock is the one on the left, and it's a dual purpose, I believe, the one on the right. There have been the development of several alternative breeds that are developed. They're modern commercial breeds developed as an alternative to the Cornish Rock. They're slower growing, but they still have very good feed conversion, and they're better foragers, and they may take somewhere between 9 and 11 weeks to finish, and those examples of those are the Freedom Ranger, K22, Silver Cross, Red Ranger, Super Dixie. And so those breeds are all pictured in the pictures on the bottom left there. The upper left is the Cornish Rock. My wife did a study through SARE several years ago, and you can look at some of the results from that study, and you can see that pounds of feed per chick, the Cornish Rock is definitely the most efficient, but it's still fairly reasonable. And then these were prices from 10 years ago, but you can see what it cost to raise the different birds in feed there on the right. Next slide is rare and specialty breeds. So a lot of people get excited about this to have unusual birds. So there's all sorts of crested type breeds, and some people are interested in these breeds specifically for getting the feathers for fly fishing, for making fly fishing, whatever it's called. And other people are quite interested in trying to help conserve rare breeds. And a great place to go for that is the livestockconservancy.org. The website is there, and you can see the list below of all the chickens in the United States that are either critical, threatened, watch, recovering, or study. If you go to the next page or the next slide, slide 37, you can see the various ducks, geese, and turkeys that need some level of conservation to make sure that those breeds remain viable. We'll move on to slide 38, marketing your products. I just want to touch a few things on marketing, and there's some additional webinars coming up that I'll give you access to here in a few minutes. So marketing your products' eggs, in the first year, depending on the breed, you might get 250 eggs per chicken in the first full year, and then the production declines. So at the larger scale where you're looking at this as a business, a lot of people will replace about half of their layer flock annually, so they always have high levels of egg production. And remember, most breeds don't start laying until 20 to 24 weeks of age. You want to know your market if you're selling eggs and take advantage of that. You probably want to key into one of the niches, local, free range, antibiotic free, pastured. There's many of them out there. You may want to give some thought as to the color of eggs that you want to sell. White, brown, colored. I think in the Northeast, brown eggs are fairly common. In the Midwest, where I was, an egg was white, and people didn't want to buy brown eggs. So you may want to know culturally what people expect around you. There's a New York Circular 845 that talks about the laws of selling eggs for the people in New York. And the graph on the right just basically shows you that as a chicken ages, its egg production goes down, but the eggs get slightly larger as the chicken gets older.
So Rich, there is a question tied to the production. Earlier you mentioned that they lay well for 2 to 3 years, and then sometimes you recommend stewing them. Do you recommend people do that themselves or find a processor to do that for them?
Well, it depends on the scale that you are at. So if you have, let's say, 50 chickens, you need to find people that want to buy stewing hens before you decide to go that route. So that's the first thing I would do, is make sure that you're going to be able to sell them, or you're planning on using them all yourself. And then it becomes a kind of a personal choice. You are allowed to do some processing and selling of chickens. There is a 1,000-bird exemption, and so you can take advantage of that. And if you're set up to do that, you may want to do that yourself. Or you may want to, take advantage of a processor and have it done there. If you're wanting to sell it to a restaurant or something, then you're going to need it to be USDA inspected plant, so you won't be able to do it yourself. So there's a lot of things that you'd have to think about to fully answer that question.
So the context here is Kathleen. So she's in an urban area and she's looking to have 3 chickens.
So if she's comfortable that she wants to retire a chicken and turn it into a stewing hen after 3 years, it might be easiest to do that yourself. It might be quite expensive to find, to take that few chickens into a processor to get that done. You may not find a processor willing to do that even. And if she's uncomfortable doing it herself, maybe she has a friend or an extension agent where she lives that she can call and get some guidance on how to proceed.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to slide 39, marketing your product's meat. There is this 1,000-bird exemption, and how the different states interpret it varies which state you are in, but typically it's only for birds that you're raising on your farm, and you have to do the slaughter under sanitary conditions. You need to keep records. You need to sell it directly from your farm, or in some states you're allowed to sell them through your CSA or at a farmer's market, but the rules do vary by state. And so you're going to want to verify what the rules are before you decide to process the birds yourself. Back in Wisconsin, we did this ourselves. We set ourselves up with the equipment to do it. We could do about 20 to 24 birds an hour. That was from slaughter to having the bird being placed into the freezer. We could do that with about 4 people. It might be easier to just use an inspected USDA slaughter facility, and if you're going to sell these birds to restaurants or at a grocery store, I think that's going to be required. There is a webinar coming up that I will send out an email to those of you that have an email that's going to address specifically both eggs in a separate webinar for poultry. We'll move on to slide 40. There's a lot of great resources put out by the Cornell Small Farm team, and the website is there, and these are just some of them. You can see that there's an on-farm slaughter guideline. The direct marketing livestock and poultry, I believe that's just been updated this year. And so that's new. And these resources are free at this website. You can either view them online or you can download them as a PDF. Move on to slide 41. These are the three webinars that I just learned about at about 5 o'clock this afternoon on Wednesday, May 13th, creating consumer-friendly bulk meat sales. Thursday, May 14th is all about eggs. And on Thursday, May 21st is from drumsticks to wings, where they'll be looking at an overview of poultry processing. Moving on to slide 42, chicken health. Prevention is key. Practice good biosecurity. I have a slide on what that means in 2 slides. Regular sanitation is critical. Think about cleaning frequently, and keeping things nice and dry will help you have healthy chickens. Buy your birds vaccinated. That is kind of a no-brainer in my opinion. Keep your water clean and cool. Feed appropriate feed and keep it fresh. Don't buy 6 months of feed at a time. Try to buy just 2 weeks to a month of feed at a time. Prevent stress. So that's thinking about dogs, children, temperature, predators. If the birds are stressed, they're much more likely to get sick. They're not that different than people in that way. So try to think about all of the things that could be causing your birds stress and find a way to prevent them. And regular observation. Look at your chickens every day, and when you see something different, do some action. And even if that just is calling me up and saying, hey, I noticed this, that's a good thing to do. The next slide, slide 43, talks about some of the common diseases of chickens. There are diseases caused by viruses such as Marek's, Newcastle, infectious bronchitis, and others. The first 3, there typically is vaccinations available for. There's diseases caused by bacteria that are common in chickens, E. coli and Salmonella. So that's why we have such stringent cooking requirements when we're cooking chicken, because there's typically those bacteria associated with the bird carcasses. There's nutritional diseases that are related to calcium and vitamin deficiencies. So if you're buying good feed properly formulated for the class of chicken you have or poultry you have, that'll help eliminate that. Avoid purchasing. You can avoid nutritional diseases by purchasing balanced feed from the feed store. There are parasites, and they can become problematic, internal and external parasites, such as lice and mites and coccidia. So sanitation is really the key for that, and getting birds that don't have these issues with them in the first place is how, if you can prevent these lice and mites being on your farm in the first place, that's the best thing to do. So good sanitation, fresh feed and water, daily observation, and biosecurity. So slide 44 is about biosecurity. And so these are 7 ideas that the USDA advise for all small poultry producers is keep your distance. In other words, you have poultry, don't go visiting your neighbor's poultry, and keep your neighbors from visiting your poultry. And if they do, have some sort of protocol there where you're going to put on plastic booties or change your clothes or something so that you don't accidentally bring diseases between farms. Keep things clean. Don't haul disease home, so that's buying from a reputable source when you first get them, and don't take someone else's free birds. Don't borrow disease from your neighbor. Know the warning signs of infectious bird diseases, and report sick birds to your vet. So if you have something that's really going on, call your vet, and they might be able to help you out. And quarantine any new birds for at least 30 days. And in the upper right, please do not kiss your birds. Slide 45. I recognize that most of this presentation was about chickens, but there are other poultry that do quite well. I currently raise ducks. It's very similar. All of the information I provided for chickens works pretty much the same for ducks. I actually find them a little bit easier keeping. Certain breeds are very prolific egg layers, not quite the 250, but 180 to 200 eggs a year is possible. There are some unique niche market opportunities for both the eggs and the meat. A couple of words about water. They will make a mess of it. They do not actually need a body of water to get into. So on the bottom right there, you don't need to have a pond or a river. They do need, or at least really want to, dip their bills in so that they can keep their nostrils that are on the top part of their bills clean. So you want to have them at least provide a bucket of water that they can dip their bills and their heads into so that they can keep their bills clean. And most domestic breeds are poor flyers. And then the last slide is about geese. A lot of people enjoy geese. They can be quite loud and aggressive, though, and in fact, that's why they make good guard animals. What's nice about geese is they can eat a lot of vegetation, and it can almost make up about 45% of their diet, eating grasses and insects. And again, there's some unique niche market opportunities with geese, including goose down or feathers, and broilers. There are some advanced commercial breeds of broilers that will finish almost a pound a week, so a 9-pound broiler in 9 weeks, 13-pound in 13 weeks. They're great birds. I've never raised them myself. So that's all I had for presentation material, so I'd be happy to take some questions.